The process of how an LM decides to call a function maybe seems a little bit mysterious initially because an LM is just trained to generate output text or output text tokens. So how does that work? In this video, I'd like to walk through with you step by step what the process of getting an LM to be able to get a function called really looks like. Let's take a look. So tools are just codes or functions that an LM can request to be executed, like this getCurrentTime function that we saw from the previous video. Now, today's leading LMs are all trained directly to use tools, but I want to walk through with you what it would look like if you had to write prompts yourself to tell it when to use tools. And this is what we had to do in an earlier era before LMs were trained directly to use tools. And even though we don't do it exactly this way anymore, this will hopefully give you a better understanding of the process and then walk through the more modern syntax in the next video. If you've implemented this function to get current time, then in order to give this tool to the LM, you might write a prompt like this. You may tell it, LM, you have access to a tool called getCurrentTime. To use it, I want you to print out the following text. Print out all caps function and then print out getCurrentTime. And if I ever see this text, all caps function and then getCurrentTime, that's when I know you want me to call the getCurrentTime function for you. When the user asks what time is it, the LM will then realize it needs to call or request to get called the getCurrentTime function. And so the LM will then output what it was told. It'll output all caps function : getCurrentTime. Now, I then have to have written code to look at the output of the LM to see if there is this all caps function. And if so, then I need to pull out the argument of this getCurrentTime to figure out what function the LM wants to call. And then I need to write code to actually call the getCurrentTime function and then pull out the output, which is, let's say, 8 a.m. And then it is the developer written code, my code, that has to take 8 a.m. and feed that time, 8 a.m., back into the LM as part of its conversational history. And the conversational history, of course, includes the initial user prompt, the fact that it requested the function call, and so on. And lastly, the LM, knowing what had happened earlier, that the user asked this question, requests a function call, and then also that I call the function and return 8 a.m. Finally, the LM can look at all this and generate the final response, which is, it is 8 a.m. So to be clear, in order to call a function, the LM doesn't call the function directly. It instead outputs something in a specific format like this that tells me that I need to call the function for the LM and then tell the LM what was the output of the function it had requested. In this example, we had given the LM only a single function, but you can imagine if we gave it 3 or 4 functions, we could tell it to output function in all caps, then the name of the function it once called, and maybe even some arguments of these functions. In fact, now let's take a look at a slightly more complex example where the getCurrentTime function accepts an argument for the time zone at which you want the current time. For the second example, I've written a function that gets the current time in a specified time zone, where here the time zone is an input argument to the getCurrentTime function. So to let the LM use this tool to answer questions like maybe what time is it in New Zealand, because my aunt lives there, and so before I call her up, I do look up what time it is in New Zealand. To let the LM use this tool, you might modify the system prompt to say you can use the getCurrentTime tool for a specific time zone. To use it, output the following: getCurrentTime, and then include the time zone. And this is an abbreviated prompt. In practice, you might put more details than this into the prompt to tell it what is the function, how to use it, and so on. In this example, the LM will then realize it needs to fetch the time in New Zealand, and so it will generate output like this: function : getCurrentTime Pacific/Auckland. This is the New Zealand time zone because Auckland is a major city in New Zealand. Then I have to write code to search for whether or not this function all caps appeared in the LM output. And if so, then I need to pull out the function to call. Lastly, I will then call getCurrentTime with the specified argument, which is generated by the LM, which is Pacific/Auckland, and maybe returns is 4 a.m. Then as usual, I feed this to the LM, and the LM outputs, it is 4 a.m. in New Zealand. To summarize, here's the process for getting LM to use tools. First, you have to provide the tool to the LM, implement the function, and then tell the LM that it is available. When the LM decides to call a tool, it then generates a specific output that lets you know that you need to call the function for the LM. Then you call the function, get this output, take the output of the function you just called, and give that output back to the LM, and the LM then uses that to go on to whatever it decides to do next, which In our examples in this video was to just generate the final output, but sometimes it may even decide that the next step is to go call yet another tool and the process continues. Now, it turns out that this all caps function syntax, it is a little bit clunky. This is what we used to do before LLMs were trained natively or to know by themselves how to request that tools be called. With modern LLMs, you don't need to tell it to output all caps function, then search for all caps function, and so on. Instead, LLMs are trained to use a specific syntax to request very clearly when it wants a tool call. In the next video, I want to share with you what the modern syntax actually looks like for letting LLMs request to have tools be called. Let's go on to the next video.